Welcome everybody to the second in this series of webinars, which is covering the theme of, or the title, I suppose, right-wing populist nationalism and the New World Order, the socialist response. The first of these was held in June, or 18th of June, and it covered, by and large, looking at the theory of what we understand by right-wing populist nationalism and whether or not this is the same as fascism, and looking at definitions, but it also looked particularly at Trump's America. This session will be looking particularly at India, but also will cover developments in Europe as well. And the third one, which is due to be held on the 26th of November, will be looking at the manifestations of this, particularly in this country, Britain. We use the subtitle New World Order because what we are witnessing, I'm sure that's why people are here, is the spread of a very dangerous form of nationalism throughout many countries of the world, and this is what we need to analyse in order to have a response. We're very, very fortunate tonight that we've got three wonderful speakers. I should say that this whole series has been organised by the Communist Party, particularly Hackney and Tower Hamlets branch and the Morning Star, but of course by the Communist Party in general. The speakers we are very pleased to have, and I will introduce them all properly in turn. But the first speaker, let me just say one more thing before I introduce Radhika, and that is that because this is a webinar, there won't be much of a chat, but there will be opportunities, and we hope you'll avail yourself of that to ask questions and even if you want to contribute, just a point or two, please do, and use the chat or the Q&A function. I think that you should hopefully all have on your own computers. So please do so. And I know that all three speakers will be very pleased to answer questions. So the first speaker I want to introduce is Professor Radhika Desai. Radhika is a geopolitical economist, and this is, I think, very, very important for this session, because what Radhika aims to do is to apply a Marxist analysis of international relations, which looks at integrating class and nation into a single economic and political framework. Radhika has, I hope I've got this right, Radhika, this is how I understood your work anyway, but you'll correct me if I'm wrong. Radhika's written many, many books, and she has got her own website, so I'd encourage you to look at that and you'll see fantastic stuff that she's written. She is a professor at the University of Manitoba in Canada, and I know she's also just finished the stint at London School of Economics in London. So Radhika, we are very, very pleased to have you. So over to you now.
Thanks very much, Mary. And yeah, I mean, actually, I'm still a visiting professor at the LSE, but I kind of go back and forth. But anyway, and the rest is right. If you want to check out what I do, please go to radhikadesai.com. Okay, so first of all, thank you, Mary, and thank you to the CPB for inviting me, to Morning Star and Tower Hamlets branch, and everyone for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be part of this very important conversation, and I look forward to the contributions of my colleagues here today, and also to the webinar in November, focusing particularly on the UK, something that I'm sure will interest a lot of people, especially given recent events with this massive Tommy Robinson rally that we had in London recently. So it's definitely something we should be thinking about. So let me just launch right into it. My main argument is that rather than understanding forces like Trump or Farage or the AfD in Germany or the BJP in India as populist, it is more important to set them in the longer history of the right since the beginnings of capitalism, really. I would like, and this particularly, and I'll come to that, and that includes a reference to fascism. No, we can have debates about it, but I think this is very important. I say this because I have seen right from the beginning. I actually remember exactly when the term populism began to become current, and I remember finding it very problematic because it seems to me, because it became very clear to me from an early stage that the term populism was being used specifically by what I call the neoliberal, tokenistically social liberal political establishment of the types of represented by Starmer or Biden or yeah, whatever. I mean, these political forces find it convenient to use the label populist. And I believe that they achieve two major purposes with this. Firstly, of course, as their own ability to win elections, as their own popular legitimacy declines, they know that they are facing insurgent forces on both left and right, to their left and to their right. And the term populism allows them to condemn both, so that, the Starmer types and so on can condemn on the one hand the Boris Johnson types and the Farage types on the right, but at the same time use the same label to discredit forces like Corbyn or Bernie Sanders or what have you. So you can say you have populism of the left, populism of the right. They are both wrong. They are rousing the rabble, and we are really, going to deliver stability and, wise technocratic rule, etc., etc. So that's the first aim. The second aim of using the term populist is actually to make right-wing, what they would call right-wing populism, appear far more acceptable than it really is, given that it contains fascist or fascistic elements. Take your pick. I don't really mind. We can discuss the issue of fascism. So what I want to do now is I want to basically go the longest part of my article, and here I'm sort of wearing my hat, not so much as a geopolitical economist, but I'll come to that in the second part, but primarily as a professor of comparative politics, because in this field, in this scholarly field, today you can't walk for works on populism. Everybody and their dog is writing about populism, and so and I've had as I say I find much of this literature very interesting. I read it, but I find that I don't particularly want to use the term populism for reasons that I understand. But I still want to then give you my alternative construction of how these political forces should be seen and why they are rising and why they are so strong today. And then I want to conclude with some thoughts about how to see the rise of the right, such forces, right, as I say, right-wing forces in the West in particular. How should you see that in the larger international context? So now, in terms of trying to understand this new resurgence of the right, the cause of it does not lie in any kind of sudden outbreak of racism or misogyny. Certain strands or certain proportions of the population have always been racist, misogynistic, certainly not the vast majority of the people. And in any case, what's really interesting is that if you look at polling data, which shows, how much racism, say, for example, an anti-immigrant sentiment is voiced in the general public in given countries, and then you try to correlate that with the rise of these new type of right-wing forces, there seems to be relatively little correlation. So that, for example, in Sweden, say, you will not find a lot of people making overtly racist or misogynistic statements, but the Sweden Democrats have been really very powerful. They have very powerful right-wing forces, whereas, say, in Spain, where you may find more expression of such sentiment, there is actually no major, there is some of these forces, but there is not the same strength of populist, I should say, in quotation marks, forces. So and in any case, as I say, some elements of the population will harbor these views, but that was true 20 years ago as it is true today, and that does not explain it. What we have seen, however, more successful explanations do point to the fact that the rise of these forces has something to do with rising economic misery, rising, stagnant wages, the deindustrialization, the loss of good jobs, etc. So definitely there is some kind of correlation there, but exactly why this is leading to the rise of such forces needs further investigation. And to me, in order to understand what's happening now, we have to begin with a very fundamental understanding that most fundamentally, capitalism and democracy are simply incompatible. They are indeed antithetical. Democracy implies egalitarianism of a certain sort, even if, it has an egalitarian logic, whereas capitalism has an inegalitarian logic. So even liberal democracy, that is democracy that has been redesigned, that has become geared to preserving capitalism, cannot retain even the modicum of electoral democracy under capitalist conditions. The only time in which this relationship has flowered was during the post-Second World War conditions of class compromise. If you think about it, in the 19th century and into the early 20th century, basically, if you were an educated person, educated opinion generally regarded democracy as a very bad thing. Nobody endorsed democracy. In the post-Second World War period, when under certain conditions, liberal democracy of a certain kind became generalized, for about 3 or 4 decades, there seemed to be a kind of an ability of capitalism and democracy to coexist, but only because important concessions had to be made to working people. In the form of the Keynesian welfare state, policies relating to full employment, progressive taxation, welfare states, etc., etc. Once that began to be rolled back in the neoliberal era after about 1980, the literature has proliferated on the hollowing out of democracy. I remember this, even back in as early as the 1990s, you had titles coming out like Democracy Light, that is to say a kind of democracy on a diet or what have you. So you had the hollowing out of democracy began to be noted. And what this hollowing out of democracy involves is a decline in the viability of political parties, so that what we've seen is both on the left, so-called left, center left and center right, what we've seen is a decline in the ability of established parties to win elections, and therefore also then rise of insurgent forces. But more fundamentally, I would say that the rise of populism has had to do with the decline of social democracy, and that has had to do with the fact that the traditional parties of the working people in European countries have given up their vocation of representing the interests of working people. And they did that with the shift, with their capitulation to neoliberalism, which in the UK took the form of Blairism, etc. So since the 1990s, what you've had is a kind of rhetoric in which left, the parties, historic parties of the working class have been telling working people, we can't dodge neoliberalism, it's globalization, it's inevitable, it's a juggernaut, we have to bow to its logic. So they have accepted neoliberalism. The only progressive phase they present is a certain social liberalism, but exactly how progressive this is can be put into question, because at the end of the day, their social liberalism is really nothing more than a type of tokenism, where the idea is that, we care about issues of racism or misogyny, etc., but you deal with them simply by placing a small number of members of these groups, women, non-white people, etc., in prominent positions, while the condition of the rest of the people remains. But the key point is that with the cross-party consensus on neoliberalism, economic issues are taken out of consideration. Economic issues are no longer political, they are depoliticized. Everybody agrees that all the established parties agree that the only economic policy is neoliberal policy. No other policy makes sense. So then the only thing to fight about are the culture wars. So you can fight about, race and gender and sexual orientation and what have you, but you can no longer politicize economic issues. So in this context, then, essentially, and this all of this is occurring precisely when, under neoliberalism, a senile capitalism, that is a capitalism that has proved incapable of promoting growth, it shows very little dynamism, is even falling technologically behind, is only inflicting ever-growing economic misery in terms of, growing inequality, stagnant wages, other, rollback of welfare, etc., etc. And in this context, on the whole, the left has been on the back foot. It has not succeeded in mobilizing the discontents of neoliberalism. So what then happens is that since the discontents of neoliberalism are there, they are, in fact, they are growing, they are proliferating. The number of people who feel that the system is not working for them is growing, then, and the left is not mobilizing, then what you get are opportunists, people who see that, okay, the established parties are unable to win elections. So we will come along, we will show how you can win elections. And by showing that they can win elections, whether it is a Johnson or a Farage or whatever, what these forces are doing is they are opportunistically using the votes of working people in order to tell the ruling class, the capitalist class, that we can be a more reliable political vehicle for you. We can win elections for you, and we can then do your bidding once we are in office. So essentially, this is like their application form to become the parties of the ruling class. So that's partly why also, of course, they opportunistically, Johnson leveling up, etc., Trump, we are going to reindustrialize America, etc. They make all sorts of promises to working people, but of course, promises they have absolutely no intention of keeping. Now, so now this resurgence to me necessarily has fascist or fascistic elements. In the 1930s, as you know, fascism was the crest of a wave of right-wing advance. But what exactly do I feel is essential? What are the essential characteristics of fascism? What has to happen before you can call something fascism? I think there are essentially two things. I regard fascism as a form of authoritarian rule that is adapted to the conditions of universal franchise. So given the incompatibility of capitalism and any form of democracy, including liberal democracy, what you get essentially is a situation in which the established political forces cannot win. So then what you get is people and cannot win within the confines of legality. So you have forces that are willing to push the envelope in terms of legality, constitutionality, etc. And you get forces who will mobilize ordinary people, sections of working people, of course, the petty bourgeoisie, etc., as a kind of para-state instrument of violence that is perhaps less visible today in the UK, although you saw with the rally, to Tommy Robinson rally, what's possible. But certainly in the case of India, for example, there is the whole organization of the BJP's various bodies, the RSS and the various right-wing Hindu bodies that are essentially operate as sort of parastate armed forces capable of inflicting parastate armed violence. And by the way, this is not just, something that happens under monopoly capitalism. If you read Marx's 18th Brumaire, and if you look at how Marx describes the activities of the Society of December 10th that allowed Louis Napoleon to win the elections, you will see that it was an extremely, very recognizable black shirt, brown shirt type of organization. It's also not surprising that, of course, classic fascism, as we think about it, emerges in post-First World War Europe precisely when these countries, Germany in particular, Italy, etc., have come for the first time to have something resembling universal adult franchise, proper democracy. So in that sense, it seems to me that when you have more or less universal franchise and you have capitalism, fascism is going to be a constant temptation, simply because liberal democracy, because in capitalism, you cannot have popular support for the existing order. So you need some kind of repressive force to be there. And of course, as we know, there are continuities between today's right-wing forces and the neo-fascist forces. Remember, the West never really dealt with, completely eradicated fascism, and nor could it. So, for example, the Giorgio Meloni's party, the Fratelli d'Italia, they have historic links with the neo-fascist forces in the post-Second World War period. So I'm going to wind down because I'm nearly at the end of my time there. So let me just shift. But let me make one other point, which is that if you are, the decline of social democracy is one element, and that they have, as I say, social democracy has stopped representing the interests of working people. And one of the key ways in which social democracy has done this is by making politics technocratic. So it's always about handing over power to alleged experts who, of course, turn out to be in the pockets of corporate capital. So that's a very interesting and important element of this. And of course, the only antidote to this is to organize on the left. That is to say, to create a left that is capable of organizing all the discontents of neoliberalism, people who are upset with neoliberalism, and not leaving them to be prey to the opportunistic political enterprises of these right-wing forces. Now, what does this mean internationally? Well, basically, I'll close with this, a couple of thoughts here. Basically, the way I look at it is that the United States and most Western countries more generally are essentially caught in an ever-deepening crisis. The United States more than most in many ways, but certainly the UK is part of it, although the two have differing governments on the two sides of the Atlantic. But nevertheless, they are essentially the economic decline, the productive decline, the financialization, etc., have essentially created a massive social crisis where you have economic inequality resulting in social division, resulting in political polarization. And remember, things were pretty bad even before Trump came back to office. I mean, under Biden, there was a proliferation of literature talking about civil war, the possibility of the reignition of a civil war in the United States. So essentially what we have is a senile, financialized, productively incapable capitalism, which is no longer viable, where there is the left is on the back foot. And so you have essentially the spiraling out of control of politics in these societies. And in that sense, there is a deep crisis of which the election of Trump and Trump-like forces in other countries is a symptom. Trump is not going to be able to resolve this crisis. Trump is only going to accelerate the spiraling descent of the United States. And I think that so in that sense, the chaos, you see today, Western countries who are themselves caught in this kind of spiral of decline are the principal fomenters of international chaos, whether it is in the form of war, whether it is in the form of sanctions, whether it is in the form of tariffs, you name it, they are causing the problem. Meanwhile, China, to a lesser extent Russia, and some of the other countries, mind you, obviously we cannot include here countries like India, but anyway, these countries are increasingly becoming a kind of practically a sea of tranquility amid the chaos being caused. So this is a big contrast. And one final point I would make is that in this context where Western ruling establishments are not able to keep hold of power, these establishments are also becoming addicted to war in a certain sense. I'm not saying that this is, this is going to result in a generalized world war or anything. Maybe that will happen, maybe that will not happen. But certainly their addiction to war and is a central part of trying to remain in control. The political establishments in Europe today, across the board, are partly committed to the war in Ukraine, for example, because it allows them to suppress dissent all the more easily. So those are the things that I wanted to say, and I'm looking forward to our discussion afterwards. And I look forward, of course, to listening to Harsev and Mariam as well.
Well, thanks, great. That's great, Radhika. You've really framed it very well indeed. So our next speaker is Harsev Bains. Harsev is the former secretary of the Association of Indian Communists. He's a member of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, and of the Communist Party of Britain. Currently, Harsev is the national president of the Indian Workers' Association, an organisation that was formed in 1938. And it's got a wonderful history, but we won't go into its history now. But Harsev is also on the executive committee of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign and does a lot of international work and is associated, of course, also with Marx Memorial Library, although he's not there in that capacity. So, Harsev, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the very warm introduction, Mary. And may I also say good evening to my fellow panelists, Radhika, Desai, and Mariam Dhawale, and to everybody in this webinar. I'd like to start this evening by actually reading a short paragraph from a very dear friend of mine, Vijay Prashad, who's known to, I'm sure, many of these people or people listening in. And it's one of his newsletters. And I really thought it touched the point here on what we're about to discuss. He said, we have now entered the last quarter of 2025, the days galloping rapidly towards another year. The image of being chased by horses is not idle, for they're not the wild horses whose beauty stuns the landscape of the meadow. These are the horses of the apocalypse. Everywhere we turn, there is the sniff of the far right of a special type at the gates of power, its leaders riding their horses at full sprint. None of these leaders have a program to solve our crisis. Rather, they throw an accelerant onto them, stoking the fires of hell to burn faster and hotter. They deny the existence of climate change and the importance of human dignity. They want to deepen austerity and encourage war. They promote irrationality and social suffocation. And he goes on to say the political collapse of social democrats and liberals through their adoption and neoliberal austerity policies has created the conditions for the mass base of the popular far right or far right popularism. Now, if we start to look at the context of the heading that we're discussing, the rise of right-wing national populism. I mean, it's different countries, obviously different people are talking about it in different ways, but Britain, as a part of that wider trend with this Brexit, and now Farage and people taking it in their own direction, whether it's under Tommy Robinson or the Conservatives or Labour to that extent. Trump, make America great again, and Trumpism, I don't know if you can call it an ism and relate it to Trump. Modi's Hindutva, Netanyahu's ultra-nationalism, Meloni in Italy, we've already heard from Radhika, and Le Pen in France. Well, they all reflect a global surge in authoritarian nationalist populism. Now, what are the core features? The one that we'll hear quite often is the people versus the elite. Well, these are the anti-establishment parties, but they don't apply to all of them. The rhetoric that makes defense of ruling class interests. The nationalist nostalgia, the myth of lost greatness. This goes back to whether it's Russia or America and making America great again, or Russia trying to extend its borders. Scapegoating migrants for the failures of capitalism. and the minorities, and describing people like myself as outsiders. The attacks on democratic rights, the attacks on right to protest, the organization of unions, and all our progressive civic society institutions. These are the core features of a populist agenda. In Britain, we had Brexit, which crystallized the right-wing populism. I know we in the left also had Lexit as well, but we had different reasons for promoting that and still hold the different reasons. And this was populism around sovereignty of a lost empire. And border controls is part of that. The attacks upon immigrants, immigration, and hostility to international institutions, whether it's the United Nations or the European Commission for Human Rights. The Conservative Party and Reform UK are shaping a political culture of authoritarianism, nationalism, and anti-migrant politics. And combined with that, with the new liberalism, of course, is the new world order. The global instability, multipolarity is emerging as US dominance wanes. Rising tensions between the West, China, and Russia, and the reshape of alliances. And we saw an example of that when China, with Modi going there and the Russian going there and embracing one another, despite their ideological differences. Imperial maneuvers, the NATO expansion, the global Britain strategy, and the military alliances aim to secure Western dominance, and NATO, and now this fly zones that we're experiencing right now within Europe at the moment. Economic crisis, inflation, climate breakdown, the food insecurity with food banks and just all these super developed countries of Europe, the uneven development that create the fertile ground for nationalist populism. Culture wars as distractions. The government weaponized identity politics, and we have some of that here with the transgender debates, the anti-woke, the anti-LGBTQs, the anti-migrant, to deflect from neoliberal failures. Why right-wing populism resonates? Why is it popular? The decades of austerity and neoliberalism hollowed out working class communities, deindustrialization and neglect of regions, fuel resentment. Here we have the north of England that compared to the southeast in Britain. Media hegemony. The right-wing press amplifies scapegoating narratives. The only answer we have in this country is the Morning Star. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have a voice. Weakening of labor movement and mass organizations. The left, people politically are disarmed. Populist offers simple answers. Blame the migrants, take back control, go back home, to answer what is basically a very complicated situation, as we just mentioned. Weakening of labor movement and mass organizations. And the one that really alarms us here in this country, and as has been mentioned, I do a lot of my work here, is the repeat of the slogans we heard in 1968, this island of, this country of strangers, to what is now the island of strangers. So what's the socialist response? What do we need to do? What could we do? Well, we have to first of all reclaim the people back to us, win them over. People that have been lost to us or people that have been attracted by this right-wing populism. And that starts with us providing leadership based on our traditions and movements to build the united fronts that we know of, that worked well, that stood well and stood the test of time. Frame socialism as the real voice of working people against the billionaire elites, the landlords and the profiteers. Assert a progressive patriotism, pride in the struggle for democracy. Democracy is going to be paramount, and we need to be pushing for that. Trade unionism, anti-fascism, and international solidarity. bring vitality to our cultures, to deepen our theories and align the academics and philosophers with the practice. Share the praxis through workers' education. And the fight for economic justice. Campaign for public ownership of energy, housing, transport, and utilities. Demand a Green New Deal, creating millions of unionized jobs. Organize around rent controls, wage rises, exposing modern slavery, and the defense of the NHS. Issues that cut through divisive narratives. Counter divisions with unity. Link anti-racism to class politics. Simple things like dividing us only helps the bosses. Challenge anti-migrant scapegoating by exposing the real causes of hardship, austerity, profiteering, privatization. Build solidarity at all levels between workers of all backgrounds. And I would go on, despite the issues that we have between capitalism and democracy, is that we need to defend democracy and rights, resist authoritarian laws, curbing strikes, protest and civil liberties. Advance democratic reform for proportional representation, regional devolution, and grassroots empowerment. And demand and engage in meaningful consultation. Rebuild the mass organizations. Revitalize trade unions, tenants, unions, and community campaigns. Use political education to build class consciousness and expose populist myths, especially around migration. Strengthen international solidarity. Link local struggles with global movements against imperialism and oppression. And become the people's voice of consensual militancy and strategy. Offer an alternative of hope, not despair. Socialism must inspire with the vision of fairness, equality, and dignity. Be concrete. Campaigns on bills, rents, wages, modern slavery, and human rights that connect directly to daily lives. Build alliances. Unite climate, justice, anti-racist, feminist, peace, workers and migrant movements. Engage with students and youth. International nationalism is key to extend the solidarity and also understand anti-imperialist work. Counter nationalist isolation with solidarity on Palestine, on Cuba, on Venezuela, and anti-imperialist struggles elsewhere. In conclusion, the right-wing nationalist populism thrives on fear, division, and false enemies. A socialist response must expose its lies to strengthen the working class with renewed confidence and project a hopeful internationalist vision for a just world. Thank you.
Thank you, Harsev. Thank you very much. That's very inspiring as well. Our final speaker, but by no means last but not least, is we're really pleased to have Mariam Dhawale. Oh, there you are, Mariam. Mariam is a member of the Politburo of the Communist Party of India, Marxist. And Mariam is also the General Secretary of one of the most amazing organisations I've ever heard of, and that is the All India Women's Democratic Association, which, wait for it, has got 15 million women members. This is a mass movement that we could only dream of. So I'm absolutely delighted that Mariam's here. I hopefully, I'm sure Mariam's going to speak a lot about what's happening in India. But you can speak about whatever you like, Mariam. We're just delighted to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mary. And I'm very grateful to the Communist Party of Britain, Hackney and Tower Hamlets branch, and the London Morning Star Group for having organized this webinar on an extremely important topic, which is actually being countered, faced, discussed in various places. So, respected Chair, Comrade Mary Davis, Radhika ji, Comrade Harsev, Bains, and all the participants who are here. I speak on behalf of the political movement in India, and I belong to a mass organization and a party which takes up movements, takes up struggles according to the Marxist-Leninist understanding of ours of the situation in the country. I would humbly like to say, you said that yes, 15 million members, but we are very aware that that's not enough, and we need to grow much more and get many more people onto the roads to see to it that there is a regime change. So yes, friends, we have gathered here at a moment when the entire global order is in quite a deep crisis. We are witnessing escalating wars, economic inequality. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Economic inequality, climate catastrophe, and on the other hand, the rise of a political force, which we are calling the right-wing nationalist populism. We are giving this word, using this word is because popular sloganeering and popular kind of in their perspective is being taken up just to emotively get people onto their agendas. You see, Marx and Lenin in the Communist Manifesto had described capitalism as a system that relentlessly expands. And what it had said, it's very, very evident. The need of a constantly expanding market for its product chases the bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. Capitalism tears down old boundaries and creates a world after its own image, but it also generates instability, exploitation, and crises. The very dynamism of capitalism produces social dislocation and political upheaval. So, this brings into the entire capitalist system not being the answer for any kind of problems. That is a known fact. But today, capitalism being in a serious crisis is trying to find ways to get out of this crisis. And because of that, we are finding that it is using nationalism, using these kind of slogans, but the ruling classes are using them to divide the workers and redirect the anger away from exploitation. Lenin had said in his analysis in Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, he showed how monopoly capital and finance capital dominated the world system and turning interstate rivalry into a permanent condition. So that is why what is happening is not very strange. Imperialism is the epoch of finance capital and of monopolies, which introduce everywhere the striving for domination and not for freedom. That is how capital and finance capital work. And that is why the more capitalism reaches that stage, the more it relies on militarism, authoritarianism, and chauvinism to maintain itself. That it has to resort to these things to be able to sustain itself. Where the heinous face, the most heinous face of imperialism we are seeing today is Palestine and the outrageous genocide that is being committed and being supported by the imperialist countries around the world. So the cruelty, the brutality of the system itself is today is not an unknown factor. Now, what has happened? Then, I mean, I'm saying this in context, keeping in India in mind too. Now, the neoliberal phase of capitalism, the globalized production, finance, and communication. Now, on one hand, on the second hand, it has produced mass unemployment, economic destruction, precarity, and tremendous destruction in the lives of the ordinary people. Now, what do the right wing does? The right wing uses this discontent to and then uses nationalism, racism, cultural conservatism to stabilize the system. Somewhere, the capitalist system uses this sloganeering to save itself from complete collapse. And that is why it reinvents. It reinvents itself, and uh, it pitches the people against an imagined enemy. Now it identifies it in, like in India we are seeing, it identifies the minorities, the Muslims, it'll identify the Christians, then it will also identify castes in certain areas. So India being India is a huge country with a lot of divisions because of the caste system. We find this is not really applicable all over the world in that sense. So the caste system, and this, it's absolutely a stratified, a solid, unshakable system in India, which perpetuates inequality, discrimination, and injustice. So it already has a feeding fodder out there, which it just needs to ignite a bit and then use it for its purpose to pitch the people against each other. Now, this is being used like the safety valve, you see, by capitalism to divert the anger again of created by neoliberal globalization, not towards the capitalist system, but to divert it towards the other. Why are the majority of the population not getting jobs? Is because the minorities are there, or culturally the minorities are destroying the fabric of India, which is basically supposed to be a Hindu Rashtra, a Hindu country. And that is why then they demonize the Mughal regime that was there in India. They demonize the laws that were made by the British, anti-sati law, anti-child marriage law. They say that was interference in the culture of Hindus. So, in this manner, the false identity is created, and the false sense of pride in being a Hindu. Now that counters, where one fundamentalism counters with the other. So you find the fundamentalism even within the minority communities at times. We find them also going the other way. So when in this atmosphere, this kind of populism provides legitimacy to the regimes to continue with their privatization, their deregulation, and their imperialist agenda. Today, unfortunately, India allies with countries that India has traditionally been non-aligned with. And we have seen how it has gone to the extent of even supporting the Israeli regime. So it's been very unfortunate. And that is why now Engels had noted in the preface to the condition of the working class in England. He had said on bourgeois politics, he had said bourgeois politics often relies on throwing workers into confusion by chauvinistic appeals. This same tactic is visible today all over the country. Now, when this project is being used in India, I wouldn't go in for the Trump regime and all, but now we are seeing how we have labeled it as in India as Trump's tariff terrorism. We have given that label. Trump's terrorism across the world is today putting many countries into serious difficulties. But nationalism is rebranding. You see, it's imperialism as a patriotic kind of an activity. It is sort of it is justifying the imperialist system under the garb of nationalism, and getting people to stand in support of it. I mean, it's a extremely contradictory kind of, it's really dialectical in a way, and one needs to understand that more dialectically. But this is what is happening. Now, in India, the neoliberal project of Modi is being infused with the Hindu nationalism. Now, in his tenure, in this last 10 to 11 years, privatization has accelerated. labor protections have been weakened, and unemployment has surged. Farmers' distress is unbelievable. Farmer suicides is growing at an alarming rate, but at the same time, it is sparking historic protests, as you've already seen in the farmers' protests. But what is the BJP? And BJP is not BJP alone. BJP is a political party, is the political outfit of the RSS. That is the Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh. That is his parent body actually. That is the body actually taking decisions for the BJP. And that is what the BJP uh, has to perform and do. So it is the BJP RSS agenda of making India a Hindutva Rashtra. They're saying Hindu, but it's a Hindutva project. Hindutva is the political project of the BJP. And in that, it means on one hand, being pro-corporate, on the second hand, being solidifying the caste system. So in their terms, Hindu doesn't mean equality or doesn't mean the rights for all. It doesn't mean that way. The Hindutva project denies the Indian constitution also. And that is why it keeps stigmatizing the Muslims continuously. You see, religious majoritarianism is being promoted. So all kinds of festivals, the Hindu festivals, are being glorified. The BJP pours in money to see to it that they are spent in a extremely lavish manner. So all the unemployed, the people who are suffering, tend to are mesmerized kind of by this kind of glorification, at least for the time being. It is like an escapism for them. Temple visits are arranged free of charge. Women are taken in this temple visits. So using caste and religion, just as the British in India during the colonial rule, how it had manipulated caste and religion, the same way Modi continues to do this. So on one hand, the global finance capital is trying to take over the markets, to try and destroy whatever safeguards are there. And so that people do not become aware of it, you divide the society and you control it through communal polarization. This is what is happening. But then you wrap it under in cultural nationalism. So you give people a pride in your own sort of imagined culture. Like, you see, culture is never a static thing, but each society has its own cultural practices. But you make it a static thing, and then you ingrain the sense that even the anti-women practices are to be glorified, are to be accepted, is because that is our culture. That is what is happening, like the dowry system, the sati, the child marriage. You see, now these may be practices, but it doesn't mean that it's the right thing. So so you have this kind of glorification. So on the one hand, you'll find Hindu women becoming a part of that. On the other hand, you will find the women from the minority sections being pulled within the community, and in the name of different kind of their own laws and own denying women the rights. Both the sides, they deny women their rights. So the actual protective laws that were fought and gained in India are today under threat. The Indian constitution is being subverted systematically. Right to life. Today, a Muslim, a minority, is killed on the roads, even if, I mean, there is no proof. There's you just under the name of doing trading cow, doing cow business. It's killed. Right to choice is dismantled. You have laws today where you cannot choose your own life partner if you are indulging in an intercaste, interfaith, interreligious marriage. You are not able to get married because if you've fallen in love with somebody who doesn't belong to your caste or religion, that is what's happening. Right to free speech. Hundreds of human rights activists and students are in jail. Opposition parties are threatened by the use of the intelligence bureau or the income tax departments, and the election commission of India, the one who should conduct the elections free and fair. Democratic institutions like that are being totally subverted, and they are just bending backwards to accommodate the Modi government. But so today, what we characterize the Modi regime as a pro-corporate communal government with neo-fascistic characteristics. It is authoritarian, it is going the authoritarian way, and it is trying to decimate the opposition so that there is no challenge to its rule. But this cannot remain for long. My time is, I think, going away now. So this cannot remain for long, because you see, there are the different things happening. One is the economic policies which are creating misery. Second is the whole authoritarianism that is repressing, that is surveillance is going on, repressing the democratic expression of any kind of opposition, and and subverting national Indian rights, or Indian whatever, Indian to the imperialist countries. So giving up that just for uh, taking forward their agenda of strengthening capitalism in India. And even worse, it's not even just only capitalism now, it's even the worst nature of capitalism, as we can see. So that is why when you say socialist response, I would like to say that yes, Marx and Engels' call of workers of the world unite, it's not a slogan of the past. It is even very much necessary in the present. And alternative visions have to be propagated. Struggles have to be taken up in a much larger way. Like, for example, this, you see, this whole Palestine, huge number of people came out on the roads. In Europe, we saw massive mobilizations, which we are not able to do in India because of the repression. Every time that we go out with a Palestine flag, the police arrest us. But we continue to do it. We continue to do it. We get arrested, we do it again. We get arrested, we do it again, and we'll go on doing it. But the question is that in this massive protest that happened, there has to be some kind of a direction given by some forces, progressive forces, who it has to take an anti-imperialist turn. It has to take an anti-capitalist turn. It cannot just remain there. So when we talk of Israel in India, we talk of Israel not just in terms of Palestine. Yes, Palestine has to be defended, but along with that, you also have to talk of how Israel and US and the imperialist countries are together. So that exposure has to be done, and that is what is very important. So without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement, that we are all very aware of. So our task is not just to analyze, but to act, to build solidarities. It is not an easy struggle, because now the right-wing forces at present appear to be strong, but the decaying of the system is also there. It's rotting inside, and that is why it is seeking ways to try and sustain itself. That is the time when we have to expose them. We have to resist the authoritarianism and build a struggle for a socialist alternative cultures. In India, we are propagating even the social reform movements that have taken place in India, has a very big history of it. So I would like to end. I think my time is over, no, Mary?
Just about, yeah.
So I would like to end with the two very interesting uh, quotations from Marx and Engels, which is there in most of all our offices in India. One is, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. And one which is inscribed on his grave here in London, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. With this, I would like to end. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. The point is to change it. Absolutely right. Thank you so much, Mariam. Now we have got well, we've got 4 questions, but actually coming from 2 people. So I'm gonna 3 questions that from the one person I'm going to try and put together because I think they kind of link together. And they're important questions, actually. And by the way, if anybody does want to ask questions, please put it into the Q&A and do it now. So this is from Joginda, who says, ask why social democracy and the left are failing to exploit the current economic decline. And in a sense, this is linked to also the question that she raises about why aren't the left reaching the masses, and how do we win over the masses? Why is it that she says many unions are not resisting the far right? So in a sense, those go together. And then there is a question from Martin Levy, who quotes Fidel, who says that Fidel spoken about the battle of ideas and emotions. And he says the far right are very good on emotions, not just by flag waving, but also by the use of social media and by presenting themselves as defending communities. How can we on the left best fight that battle of emotions? I think there's some good questions there. So start with Radhika. Would you like to comment on that, on them?
Your mic.
You're muted, Radhika. Yeah.
Okay, I got it. Yeah, so I guess on the first question, which is about essentially, the decline of social democracy, etc. I mean, it seems to me that this may sound a bit harsh, but it seems to me that there have been formative problems on the left, on the social democratic left, going back, well, a century or more. I mean, if you think about it, going, in the Second International, already there were revisionist currents. And in many ways, they have tended to dominate. So, for example, in the case of the UK, which is the Western country I know best, the left never really became a truly revolutionary anti-imperialist left. I mean, in a certain sense, Western Marxism, social democracy, etc., ended up making compromises with imperialism, compromises on, so for example, in the case of the UK, there has never been any coherent left strategy of dealing with the most powerful faction of British capital, namely the financial sector or the City of London or whatever you want to call it. And the left has been beaten back again and again on this score. So, there was a fantastic post-1945 victory, but the Attlee government had essentially run out of steam in terms of ideas of going beyond the most elementary welfare reforms that they did enact, and they were very important for that time, but the left has never really thought of going beyond that. So we really need to reform a more radical left that understands, another problem that I find on the left is that the left does not sport a Marxist understanding of capitalism, which would understand that capitalism is contradictory, crisis-prone, and ultimately unable to incapable of historical advance. They have instead a Schumpeterian understanding in which capitalism is the best thing since sliced bread for, essentially promoting technological advance and innovation, and that somehow, therefore, we must always compromise with it. We can't do better than that in terms of production. I also think that, particularly since the demise of the Soviet Union, but probably even before that, the left has never really made the case for the importance of a planned economy. No matter how democratic and decentralized you make it, some kind of overall planned economy will be absolutely necessary. And these ideas have remained discredited. And I think at a time like this, when capitalism is so manifestly failing, not just on the question of distribution or redistribution, it is also failing on the question of simple production and innovation. I think that the case against the left has to be strengthened. So a case against capitalism on the left has to be strengthened, and it obviously, it requires a reinvention of the left. One hopes that this your party becomes a more viable enterprise, and so on. But yeah, so that's my answer to that question. As far as emotions are concerned, I mean, I have to say, of course, I think that, today, for example, one hardly has to do very much work to incite emotion against the wars, particularly in Gaza, that are occurring. People are emotional about it. People are upset about it. That is why the Starmer government has finally had to say they're going to do something in the form of at least the tokenistic a recognition of the Palestinian statehood and so on. But so the emotions are there. I don't think we're lacking in it, but I don't particularly, I mean, I think that the left has its own, what can we learn from the right? The left has to have its own distinctive form of organization, which will never be a parallel to that on the right, because the right does not want to change very much. The left has a much more radical agenda, which will require a far more thoroughgoing form of organization. It will require, for example, creating consent for a transition to socialism, in which there will be initially a great number of difficulties. Capital
Radhika, I'm
will do
going to have to
everything
stop because
possible to fight back. Sorry.
yeah, I think I'm going to have to bring the others in because
Of course.
time is
Yeah.
running out. But there is just one more. In a way, this is linked. There's Dale's Ball has said that as a young person who's a socialist, how do we plan to appeal to the next generation of communists? So in a way, it's part of that. How do you build the opposition? How do you build the left? And what's the problem with the fact that we haven't? Harsev, you next.
Okay, gosh, very, very interesting questions. Basically, I think, first of all, it's addressing the very first part of the question was this decline of the social democracy and what is going on. Well, the whole concept, I think, has been explained by Radhika very eloquently earlier on, is about the failures of capitalism and the way it's gone. And I think the examples from India as well. If we look at it, especially in Britain, since these questions are coming from Britain here, the running of the state, who actually runs it now? Or the running of the state even in America, for instance, who's running that? Is it Elon Musk and his oligarchs and all the people up there, or or do we still believe there's a political power somehow running it? Capitalism is failing. In this country, definitely we know there are no jobs, especially up in the north. For young people in particular, this is a major, major issue. In India, they also have similar issues. I'm sure Mariam will touch upon things like that. Here we just witnessed demonstrations. Again, the people haven't awakened to it. When we were saying welfare and not warfare, that there seems to be this charm or this attachment by the media, by everybody else, that we need to be spending more of our budgets on arms, on arm manufacturing, even if the economy is to be revived, is linked to arms manufacture and not to some consumable goods that people could actually need and require. These are serious issues, I think, that undermine the social democratic process, the electoral system itself. We had the absurdity in the last elections here where the Labour Party actually secured lesser of the votes than its predecessors in 2019, yet ended up having more seats in government. And as I said, this thing about welfare and warfare, it hit me home rather personally. Had a very severe tooth, and I had to pay quite a bit for it. And I couldn't understand why dentistry here we have to pay for, yet you can get free eye examinations. And apparently it was the same thing in 1945 when we set up the health service after that, that we had an option of bringing dentistry in, and they went for warfare instead to feed the nuclear arms. There are political choices, and that's one of the reasons I think we are failing, because what the right-wing populism is doing is when there's no jobs, the solution isn't to get rid of the migrants and make them scapegoats, but it is another option. But they don't pick that up. They pick up the easy option and they run with that. I went through earlier on in the paper, I don't want to repeat it again what we said, but certainly there are options in front of the left, and we have to pick them up. We have to make ourselves popular. We have to use the slogans that and take up the issues that affect people, and young people in particular, whether it's doing this to do with their student fees, whether it's to do with their education in any way, or to seek employment. And before we can draw them into our movement, we got to address their issues. And addressing their issues mean even if it's their localities. I live in a locality with a lot of flag waving going on. I'm surrounded by them. Now, that's not populism in that sense, but it's certainly something that appeals to them. I've been interviewed by what I would say pretty right-wing American channel as the IWA president. They asked me, what do we think about flag waving? We are not against flags, but we are against the way that they've been portrayed and the way they've been used. I think the left has to own the people, has to own the issues, and be part of it, listen to people more. What is it? That doesn't mean we have to go down to the lowest level, which the Social Democrats are doing in this country, by national jingoism. We do not go down to the level of reform. We have to actually expose all the things that are wrong with the idea that comes from the global north, that this tarnished liberalism, what it actually stands for, how it's actually damaged the economy and our society in itself and the culture that we have. I think we have to identify those in a segmented way. And I'll end with one little word: educate. We have to educate ourselves and educate the youth. Only then can we start to convince others and bring them over to on our path.
Thank you. Mariam.
Well, very briefly, I won't go into the analysis which already Radhika and Harsev have given, but that young person was asking about ideas and emotions. I can only say that, you see, certain ideas of justice, ideas of seeing a changed world where there's equality, etc. You see, once these ideas catch the imagination of the masses, then it becomes a material force. Wherever in the world changes have happened like that. There are no shortcuts to it anyway. So there has to be some kind of an organizing force. There has to be some organizing force which believes in this at the ground level. It's only then. And you see, it's when we sometimes say that the left or socialist forces have weakened over time. I'm not going into the analysis of the reasons for it, but you see, communism as an ideology, Marxism as an ideology has also been demonized by the capitalist system, and there was a time when people used to be very proud of saying that they are communists. But I do not know now in the Western world, if you say you're a communist, how it is looked upon. I really have no idea, frankly. But so the whole capitalist system has been extremely aggressively trying to denigrate the socialist system. Now we all know that that's a much higher stage of, which helps human development at a much higher level, but somehow that has not gone through to the people. So we need to be a little more aggressive with our own campaigning. Now, social media, the whole social media sector, who is it controlled by? Though people do make use of it, but in the final analysis, who controls it? Now we have to counter that through our own means and be able to go to the people. So going to the people with whatever we have, however small we may be, that is not the point. The point is, however small we may be, we have to go to the people with certain ideas and try and mobilize them. That's the only way one can bring about a change. And that's the only way changes have happened worldwide. You see, it's nowhere it's been like only through, through discussions or through, this kind of thing. You have to be there on the roads and you have to give it that turn. You have to give it that political turn. Without that, it cannot change.
Thank you very much. Now, we haven't got any more questions other than some very nice comments that people are making. And thanking you for your very straightforward answers. Dales is very much looking forward to joining the Communist Party of Britain. Dales, you're very welcome. That's just what we want. We have got a few minutes, we've got 10 minutes left, and I'm going to ask a question, if you don't mind. My question is this. One of the ways in which the neo-fascist, right-wing populist nationalists, whatever we want to call them, all over Europe, one of the ways that they have managed to become popular, in inverted commas, is by appealing to workers, the working class. That's what's happened, certainly in America, hasn't it? When, the whole MAGA movement, in fact, if they didn't appeal to working class, they wouldn't get anywhere. And if you think about Germany in 1933, what was the Nazi party called? The National Socialist German Workers' Party. So my question to you is, how do you think, can you got any insights in how you think we can raise the level of class consciousness in order to ensure that right-wing, the fascists don't have that appeal to the workers and that socialists and communists do? It is a question, I think, of thinking about how to raise the level of class consciousness. I know it's a very difficult question that all of you have got about 3 minutes to answer. At first thoughts, it seems this is, to me at any rate, is the essence of it. So, anybody want to have a go? I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot, but there you go.
I can have a go if you like. So I think that it's important to remember that in any kind of democracy with full universal adult franchise, no matter how constitutionally limited it may be to preserving capitalism, forces of capital, the forces of the right, cannot do without a certain modicum of working class support. I mean, capitalists are too few in number to actually have, obviously an electoral coalition to win. So there's always been support for parties of the right, for parties of capital from the working class. Back in the day, I forget the name of the political scientist, but Robert Silver wrote this thing, Angels in Marble, about how Disraeli created working class support for himself. But the thing is that, or even in the post-Second World War period, some elements of the working class always supported the conservatives. But it's one thing for the conservatives to get some working class support when they support the welfare state, when they are relatively more middle of the road, relatively more moderate, as they had to be in the post-Second World War period to remain a force in play. And it's quite another when people like Farage or Johnson or whatever are winning substantial working class support, even while sticking to fairly right-wing agendas, fairly neoliberal agendas. And I think the difference is this. In the first case, in the post-Second World War period, the working class was more mobilized. Trade unions were strong. So in that sense, even when they gave support to the Conservative Party, working people demanded something in return and got it. today it is the working class is ending up, or elements of the working class are ending up being fooled, being defrauded by these political entrepreneurs like Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, because there is no left to defend them. And I think that historically, fascist forces have always been strongest when the left has been on the back foot, has been weak, has been defeated, etc. And I think that that's the situation we are in right now. And so obviously the thing to do is to strengthen the left. And I don't think that the only thing we can do is to somehow like raise consciousness. I think we also have to find go and support the struggles of working people wherever they are, wherever they are taking place. So yeah, I mean, and build a coalition around that. And there's no doubt that there are a lot of such struggles taking place today. Thanks.
Harsev?
Okay, yeah, I think it's a good question, Mary. It's probably a very good question to actually finish today's discussions on. And it is extremely important. I think we got to try and strengthen our structures that we have, at least look at them and re-examine them. As I was saying, we build on our traditions. We had the trade union branches, reactivize those because they're not as active. Where people are in unions, participate in those. Where people are no longer working, not in unions, attend the Trades Council wherever they exist. And there's not many places they do exist, but wherever they are, attend their meetings and get involved with them. And if they don't exist, try and form them. There are trade unionists amongst us. And it's thus incumbent upon us to rebuild that working class movement. And it has to be at grassroots. We can't superimpose it. We can do all the education, and what Marx Memorial Library and the education and the worker school does is fantastic work. Do more of that. Trade unions need to be doing more of that. And by the way, they don't need to just be addressing working class issues. Well, they are working class issues, but not just trade union issues. They can also be addressing issues that affect, for instance, the hostile environment in this country against migrants. And they can be addressing and then drawing them into the working class ideology. The left is fragmented here. I'd love to say we had a magic wand to say, get over your differences and come to some sort of united platform to rebuild the left. That's probably a bit of a daydream too far. We've got to make the left attractive to young people, to the working class. And so that it's not sort of populism, but actually attractive. That we recognize their issues. We recognize their frustrations that they're feeling, which are being totally, I think, used by the right for their own interest, because they're not going to do anything about the fact that they're out of work, or their housing that they can't afford, or the food that they can't put on their table, but they're simply exploiting those ideas. We need to give them real alternatives, real hope that it's not despair, but the move towards socialism that will inevitably address it. Socialism sometimes a step too far, but in the meantime, we do have to give them hope through some real tangible campaigns we can win, and pick up small campaigns that we can win and we show an outcome to. If we go for utopia, they won't see the results. We have to start showing some results that people can be attracted by.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mariam.
Yeah, just very briefly, Mary, actually, you see, the whole working class today is not the classical working class that it was there, some decades earlier. So working class has also changed its the way the industry works today. So one has to address those issues, and one has to expose the way the exploitation is taking place. Like, for example, this outsourcing that goes on, how how cheap labor is being used, and how the profits of the capitalists is being enhanced in that manner. So the whole IT sector, the whole service sector, which has increased. So one has to address those issues. And secondly, I mean, the working class, you have to approach the younger the younger generation in a much more dynamic way, I feel. In India also we are seeing, India has a very huge young population, a very, very huge young population. So nearly 70% of our population is below the age of 45. So we have a very, so they are the ones who need to come ahead. The students and the youth, they need to be influenced so that, you get a kind of a base for the future. In another 10 years, you may have some kind of a base, you can have some kind of activists. In India, we have a concept called as whole time workers of the community. There was a term earlier, if you remember, Mary, it's called as professional revolutionaries,
Yes.
whose only work was to work for the revolution. Okay. So where is that concept gone? So that is the thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think, the exposure of the system has to be more consistent through pamphleteering, to bringing out small booklets. That's the way I think.
Well, everybody, this has been fantastic, and uh, we've made one big. Well, I think there's a real result from this, because Dales has this definitely decided to join the Communist Party as a result of, so they see small victories. So he was thinking about your party, whatever it's going to be called, your party UK. This is the Corbyn thing, but he's decided to join us, so that's good. So and I think really what this shows is that we do have to have the theory, but we have to have the practice as well. That's the key. That's why I asked that question. Practical things about what we can do to change the situation, and it really does summarise the quote that Mariam made earlier, on Marx's grave, because we do have to understand the world in order to change it, but we do have to change it. The unity of theory and practice. So this isn't just going to be a talking shop, obviously, because we are all going to do whatever we do. And hopefully we can do it, though, with the full understanding what needs to be done. I would like you all to put the 26th of November into your diaries, because that's when we're going to have the third webinar, and we will be looking much more closely at the situation in this country. We've always said, haven't we, that one of the key things about having raising the level of class consciousness, of course, it's got to be to build within those working class organisations that actually, this is a problem for us, but it also means building the Communist Party as well in every country. So follow Dale's example. If you're not a member of the Communist Party already, please think about joining it. We do dare to struggle, and we also dare to win, and we hope we will win. So I want to thank you so much, Radhika, Harsev and Mariam. It's been great. And
Mary, can I have 10 seconds?
you can.
Right. I've just got in my hands a copy of a book. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
Sitaram Yechury, A Towering Legacy. Just arrived in UK. If anybody wants a copy, it's 400 odd pages, and it has a part from Mary as well in it.
But I think you should tell people who Sitaram was.
Sitaram Yechury was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of India, Marxist. He sadly passed away last year. It was his anniversary on 12th of September, and that's when this book came out. It's a collection of essays about his life, reflections, and so on. It's a wonderful book. We had just got a quick glimpse at it. Mariam had a look at it today as well. I don't know what she thought of it, but it just arrived today in UK. Sitaram Yechury, A Legacy, available £10 from myself, and we'll get some copies to MML Library as well if they want some to sell over there.
Okay, thank you very much.
It's an excellent book. I read some of the articles. It is just wonderful. And I think it answers a lot of questions also, which were raised in today's webinar.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and everybody rush to buy the book. You'll have to, we'll publicise it where you can get it.
Yeah.
Do it now. It's a shame you should have put it in the chat, but never mind.
I know.
We've got to end now anyway. So thank you, and thank you.